Welcome to Decoding Devy. We're going into week 8. We had a week off last week because I was in Ann Arbor for the Michigan Penn State game, and we'll talk about that game later. But exciting week of games last week, another slate of them this week. So make sure you subscribe to the IDP Guys YouTube channel. Tons of great content on there. So let's go ahead and get into talking about some of the games last week. There are three games of two undefeated teams in the top 10. The biggest one was Tennessee and Alabama. I was a tad bit surprised. Definitely early in this game, Tennessee jumped out early. Alabama was able to come back. It was kind of back and forth after that. Alabama had a chance at a field goal late, missed it, and then Tennessee with Hendon Hooker was able to drive 40-some yards for the game-winning field goal. A big win for Tennessee, gets them in the top 5. Alabama has a setback. I don't think it's just the one loss, though, because Alabama has had a conference loss before, still made it to the playoff. But they've had some close calls this year already, and that defense does not look to be very good. And Bryce Young is really carrying that team. Jahmyr Gibbs did have another good rushing game with over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he's really starting to get it going. One of the reasons I really liked him going to Alabama, just a better offense. But on the side with Tennessee, Hyatt, really came in there with 5 touchdowns. And Hooker looked very good. We'll talk about him a little bit more in the Devy aspect in a little bit later. But, Hendon Hooker really pushed himself into the Heisman race with that signature win for Tennessee. Now we'll see if they can just keep it going. And they might face Alabama again in the SEC title game. They will eventually play Georgia, and that would be a huge game. Another one, as I mentioned, going to Ann Arbor for the Michigan game. Great experience. We had good seats. Really, this game wasn't as close as the score, especially at halftime. In the first half, Penn State really only had 2 plays. A long run by Sean Clifford, the quarterback, to get them down within the 5, and they eventually scored, even though it took them 4 downs. Michigan was able to do whatever they wanted on offense. And the only real mistake was a tip pass that was ran back for a touchdown. So the game at halftime was 16-14. Michigan the lead when it looked early as a rout, a blowout. It ended up being a blowout, but Penn State caught the early lead, getting the ball first in the second half. But as I said, Blake Corum had over 150 yards. Donovan Edwards had over 150 yards. Both had a long touchdown run in the third quarter, really put it out of reach. They could have piled on more points, but they, in the red zone, they settled for field goals. But Michigan really exerted their dominance on Penn State. They couldn't really get anything going. And other than, those 2 big plays, it really was no production for Penn State. So a big win for Michigan. It does show that even though they lost Hassan Haskins, some linemen, some defensive players from last year, they might be better than last year. So that last matchup against Ohio State will probably be much of the same, that high-flying Ohio State offense. Michigan really trying to run the ball and play, good defense. So we'll see how that goes. But Ohio State's defense does look better, but we'll see how that it trends. But it looks like a colossal matchup the weekend of Thanksgiving. And the last game, Oklahoma State and TCU. Oklahoma State went out to the lead, got a couple touchdown lead a couple times. TCU was able to come back. Quentin Johnson had another huge game. And Matt Stuggan, he was left for dead last year, but he's playing very well. They were able to tie it up at the end and then outlast Oklahoma State in double overtime. So TCU is in the driver's seat for the Big 12. So a very good year for them with their new coach Sonny Dykes from SMU. In another game of note, USC played Utah. Even though it was at Utah, I thought USC would win this by at least a touchdown. But USC's defense continues to let them down. USC got out to lead 2 touchdown leads multiple times. allowed the defense to come back, and then ended up going up by a touchdown with about 6 minutes left. But Utah came back with a touchdown very late in that game, went for two, got it. Cam Rising, the quarterback for Utah, had a very good game. He's really starting to play a lot better, and he's an intriguing name Devy-wise. He doesn't get a ton of looks, offensively because they don't pass the ball as much as other teams, but he's really starting to put up some very good games this year. And Caleb Williams had another great game with over 300 yards, almost 400, and 5 touchdowns. So this week we have 5 top 25 matchups. We'll just briefly go over them. Undefeated Syracuse 6-0 faces undefeated Clemson at 7-0. They go to Clemson. It's a noontime game. DJU is looking a lot better. He's playing well. He's running the ball. Syracuse is a little bit of a surprise, but they have Garrett Schrader, who has really improved on his passing. Obviously, he's a good dual threat quarterback. Sean Tucker had a big game last year against Clemson, so I'm very interested to see how he will do and how Schrader will do against that defense and see if that Clemson offense can keep it moving. I personally think Clemson just is too much for Syracuse, but I would not be surprised if it's a much closer game than the 13.5 line that Clemson gets. In the Pac-12, another big game. UCLA plays Oregon. UCLA is undefeated. Oregon's 5-1. So it'll be very interesting. The quarterback-wise, both dual threat players. Bo Nix, Thompson Robinson. Robinson has really moved up this year, may play more consistent, with the run and the pass. They also have Zach Charbonnet. Even though this is at Oregon, I just think UCLA probably has the better offense, and I just trust Robinson a little bit more than Bo Nix, and so that's why I have UCLA winning this game. Even though Oregon is the 6-point favorite at home, I think UCLA wins this, but I think this could be a very close game to the end. Another one in the Big 12, after that loss to TCU, Oklahoma State now hosts Texas, who is 5-2. Probably should be 6-1 if Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt. So it'll be very interesting to see how Quinn Ewers and Bijan Robinson and Xavier Worthy and that Texas offense does against Oklahoma State and their very good defense, and see how Oklahoma State plays, because Spencer Sanders has been playing very well this year, not only passing the ball, but running the ball. This one, Texas is a 6.5-point favorite, but with Oklahoma State at home, I think it's going to be very close. Might come down to a late field goal, in my opinion. But to me, this is a very big toss-up. Alabama, after that loss to Tennessee, ends up hosting Mississippi State, who had a disappointing loss to Kentucky last week, where Chris Rodriguez rushed for almost 200 yards. So we'll see if they can come back. Will Rogers had a mediocre game against Kentucky. So we'll see if that Alabama defense continues to struggle and if this ends up being a shootout. I think Alabama will win this, but the line is Alabama by 21. I think it's going to be closer than that just because Alabama's getting all the penalties they have. Bryce Young's still working back from the injury, and the Alabama defense is just not able to really shut down offenses. So I just think Mississippi State will be able to score enough where the line isn't going to be that huge at 21, but this could be a very high-scoring game. The over-under is 60.5. And lastly, after that win against Oklahoma State, TCU hosts Kansas State. Surprise in the Big 12, 5-1, 3-0 in the Big 12, led by Adrian Martinez. I think TCU should be able to take this game. TCU really struggles defending the pass. Adrian Martinez hasn't really done that, passing very well. It's more running, and TCU is much better against the run. And it looks like Quentin Johnson has really got rolling. He's now over 500 yards, has had a couple touchdowns the last 2 games. So very, very big game, and that's a night game, so it'll be a good way to end the college football week. So now I wanted to talk about the landscape of the 2023 QB class. So first and second, depending on who you ask, is C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, and then there's that third quarterback spot, which we knew going into this season there was a third quarterback spot, and it looks like it's still unsure, but I think a couple have moved um, farther up. So just looking at them, first we got Anthony Richardson, the darling early in the season with his running ability, and he's finally getting to start this year, but he has a lot of room to grow as a passer. I think he still has great potential. Um, I'm guessing he's going to, unless he totally lights up the second half of the year, he comes back next year, and if he improves, he'll do very well. But this year, under 60% passing, 1,300 over 1,300 yards, but 6 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Obviously, the running game is great for him, and he's a great athlete, but he definitely needs to grow in that. Devin Leary, I've been very disappointed with up until his injury. He just hasn't put up the big numbers. I thought he would be one of the big jumpers for this quarterback class that could go to number 3. This year he's at 61 completion percentage, 11 touchdowns, 4 picks, 1,200 yards. Not bad stats, but compared to last year with over 65% completion, 35 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 3,400 yards. So Leary really went down with that injury. It's going to be a toss-up for him. I wonder if he does try to maybe come back and have a full season. Then we got Jaren Hall out of BYU. He has actually improved on his completion percentage. This year is 67.7, about 4 points higher than last year. Last year he was 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. This year 17 to 3. And has 1,900 yards already, ended with 2,500 last year. So he's putting up good numbers, but there's just some inconsistency against better defenses. Didn't play overly well against Notre Dame. So I do wonder, because I think one of the reasons Zach Wilson left BYU early was he had those really big games against good teams and showed the wow factor so he could leave. So I'm still unsure about Hall. I like him quite a bit, but I do wonder if he'll come back another year to try to improve on some of the things. Seeing the field quicker, some accuracy issues. He has been hurt by some wide receivers being out of the lineup. Now, Hendon Hooker, he is an older player. I believe he's 25, or will be 25 before he gets to NFL. He played at Virginia Tech, did not play overly well, but I think that's more of the system and the scheme. At Tennessee, he's been lights out the last 2 years. Last year, 68% completion, 31 touchdowns, 3 picks, almost 3,000 yards. This year already, he's raised his completion percentage to 70%. 15 touchdowns, only 1 interception, 1,800 yards. There are questions about, this Tennessee system. Kind of it's wide open, and will it translate to NFL? I'll say Kenny Pickett was picked in the first round, had a great year. Hooker has, 2 years of production in a harder conference at Tennessee. He is older, but I've always thought quarterback-wise, if you can get a good 4 or 5 years, that's your investment, at least in their first rookie contract. So I could see Hooker's really moving up. So we just got to make sure he doesn't drop off and he keeps up putting these big numbers. And a big game is going to be that Georgia game with that good Georgia defense, to see if he can put up huge numbers against them. Definitely, he could be in that third spot. Actually, I think skipping around, but I think him and DJU are probably neck and neck for that third spot for me. It's looking more like last year was the aberration because DJU is playing so much better this year. He's up 9% on completion percentage. Still would like it higher, but at 64%, 17 touchdowns, only 2 picks, way up from the 9 touchdowns and 10 picks last year. 1,600 yards. He's running the ball way better. So DJU is, him and Hooker, we'll see how they finish out the year. DJU is the higher recruit. DJU is the player that more people are high on, and the younger player. So we'll see with him and Hooker, but very similar, both mobile quarterbacks that can run the ball and that can pass the ball very well. I think Hendon Hooker would have the better production. But as long as DJU and Clemson continues to win, I could see them doing very well. A couple other quarterbacks that Will Levis, a lot of people are high on before the season. I wondered how he would do without Wandale Robinson. He's kind of been up and down. He's actually got a better completion percentage, raised at 3.5% to 69.5%, so that's very good. 13 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, 1,600 yards. He's missed a game. He had a couple rough games against Mississippi State or against Ole Miss. I would just like to see more consistency from him, but he is playing with a lot of young wide receivers, and he does show some physical tools. I could see him being in the getting drafted in the second round, but it'll all depend on the draft capital and where he goes. A lot of these mocks that have him top 15, I just don't necessarily see it because I just think Malik Willis showed similar things, and I think Malik Willis is actually a better decision maker, but Levis is playing in the better competition in the SEC. Lastly, Tyler Van Dyke. He had a big year last year. A lot of people were expecting another big year this year in Miami, but Josh Gaddis came from Michigan, and he helped lead Michigan, to a good year last year. I think Michigan's offense is better this year without him. I think he was always going to be a run-heavy offense coordinator. I think the passing concepts leave a little bit to be desired. Doesn't really necessarily help the quarterback all the time. Van Dyke started out very slow. The last couple games, he's gotten over 300 yards and been very good. He's actually up, around 1.5% in completion percentage to 63.8. Last year, he had 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. This year, he already has 4 interceptions, only 9 touchdowns. So we'll see how he finishes out the year. But I think Van Dyke might be a player where he might need to come back, get some more of those talented receivers in for him, and then maybe he could do more next year. So a lot of people say that this quarterback class is pretty deep, which it could very well be. There's not the elite talent. There's a couple that should go in the first round, as I said, Stroud and Young, and then Hooker and DJU could sneak into the first round, I think, based if they continue their trajectory. But the other players are, fringe day 2. So we'll see how that really affects where they are and how far they go up. But this, pretty much a little over midway through the year, just wanted to do a quarterback kind of Devy stock watch. All right, next, didn't do start and sits last week. We've been 50% so far this season. So let's go over some of the starts. Devin Chain versus South Carolina, the running back from Texas A&M. South Carolina is 99th versus the run. Texas A&M might be starting a different quarterback, freshman. Even if they weren't, the offense hasn't been passing the ball overly well. They'll depend on the run, and I think a Chain will really lead that. Xavier Valde versus Stanford. Valde has 3 of the last 5 games over 100 yards, and Stanford is 117th versus the run. Next is a freshman running back from Maryland, Ryan Hemby. So he took over. Actually, I spelled that wrong. It's supposed to be Roman Hemby. Took over the main rushing last game versus Indiana and had 17 carries compared to the other back, the next back which only had 5. Northwestern is 110th versus the run. I don't know who's going to start quarterback for Maryland, so I think they might depend on that run and that Hemby could have a big game. Last is Michael Pratt versus Memphis. He had some injuries earlier, but has really come back playing well. And Memphis is 122nd versus the pass, so I could see him from Tulane having a big game. Since I know Tanner Mordecai had a big game last week, but Cincinnati is top 30 in pass defense, so I don't think he'll reach that top 24 at his position that this start sits is from. Sean Tucker, if you have Sean Tucker, probably not sitting him, but this is more, I don't think he finishes in the top 24 versus Clemson. They're only allowing 80 rush yards a game, and Tucker has 3 of the 4 of his last games under 100 yards, so he's not putting up those huge numbers. Still very good, still a great prospect. Next is George Halani, running back for Boise State. Air Force is 42nd in rush defense. Halani has a good last couple games, well over 100 yards. But, Air Force tries to control the clock and control the ball like Navy, also in Army also try to do, and with their good rush defense. I just don't know if he'll be able to get the big numbers that he's really going to need to stay in the top 24. I talked about Adrian Martinez, first TCU. He does much more running. He has not thrown for more than one touchdown in a game this year, so you'd be depending on rushing touchdowns, a lot of rushing yards. I just don't think he'll be able to do that against TCU. Not great in bets. I'm under 40%. So let's see if we can get some bets that will win this week. I like BYU minus 6.5 at Liberty. I think they'll just be able to score kind of at will against Liberty, and their defense will be able to hold down Liberty. So I have BYU pretty much winning by a touchdown. UCF at East Carolina. Both offenses have been going crazy lately, and I like the over at 65.5. Plumlee for UCF has just really been thriving, with passing and rushing. And East Carolina and UCF's defense tends to give up points, and East Carolina has been scoring crazy lately with their offense. Next, I have Cincinnati -3 at SMU. Cincinnati has had a couple close calls, but I think they're the better team, and SMU has really struggled lately to keep leads and stay in games. And lastly, I have Texas A&M -3 at South Carolina. South Carolina is not a very good team. Texas A&M has struggles, but like I said, I think they'll be able to run the ball. And that strong defense is just going to be too much for South Carolina, even on the road. All right, this is my my DFS picks for the week. I'm going all in on Sam Hartman, even with the high price against that bad Boston College team. Pairing up A.T. Perry with him to get that stack. Also in that game, I have Zay Flowers. I think it could be a high-scoring game. I spoke about Valladay versus Stanford. I really like him. McClellan, Cincinnati versus SMU. I see him having a very good game. Michael Mayer, against that, the defense, I think he really has a nice game, and he's only at 5,000. Then Garrett Schrader versus Clemson. I thought it was a good price point, and even though Clemson's defense is very good, they almost allowed Florida State to come back. And with his running ability, it seems like they sometimes have trouble with the dual threats. So I think he'll get enough rushing yards to really allow him to get good points at that superflex. And lastly, Jatavian Sanders for Texas. I really needed just a low priced player that could possibly have a big game, and I could see him doing that this week versus Oklahoma State, as I think Oklahoma State will look to take Xavier Worthy out of the game, possibly double teaming or putting someone up top against him. And lastly, price picks. I'm below 40% on this also, so let's hope we can get some. All of these I did the over. So Jane Daniels, quarterback for LSU, I have him going over 40.5 rushing yards against Mississippi. He has 3 out of 5 games over 40 rush yards, and the other 2 were very close at 37 rush yards and 38 rush yards. Next, I have Elijah Cooks from San Jose State. He has 2 out of 3 games over 100 yards receiving, so the 73.5, the over for him. Then next is Caden Prieskorn, tight end for Memphis. He has 3 out of 5 with over 3 receptions. The other 2 were at 3 receptions. So this is the one I feel the least good about, but he's really been producing for them, so I see him getting the over. Lastly, the quarterback for Purdue that has started slow but really come on since coming back from his injury, Aiden O'Connell. So I think for Purdue, he'll do very well this week versus Wisconsin. Their defense is not what it used to be, and O'Connell has had 3 out of 4 games over 30 completions, and they have running back injuries there. So I have O'Connell with over there. So that does it for this week of the preview and betting. for week 8. So thanks for joining. Sorry I missed you guys last week, but stay tuned and hopefully these bets will help you. And I'll catch you guys next week. And make sure to subscribe to the IDP Guys YouTube channel.